All right, welcome everybody. Nice to have you here. So you're here in this life. Don't you suppose that it might be a good idea to do it well? Sometimes I think people don't really question something like that. They just make assumptions. But think about that. Because the alternative, or I suppose alternatives, would be you could do it badly, or you could try to avoid doing it at all. Have you tried either of those strategies? Sometimes people try to just distract themselves. The problem with that strategy is that it's difficult to distract yourself sufficiently and consistently enough throughout your entire life. Eventually, the things that you use to distract yourself, like the drugs, the sex, the CrossFit, the vacations, scrolling on your phone, the you know new restaurants, the business deals, all that kind of stuff. Eventually, it kind of fails. You ever had that happen? I'm reminded of there's this guy named Wayne Lickerman who writes in one of his books about an experience that he had when he was he was an addict, and one day it all stopped working, like completely. He could not get high, just was not working at all. Can you imagine what that would be like? So that strategy is not, I wouldn't recommend that strategy. So I think it's probably worthwhile to sincerely consider doing it well. And if you're going to consider that, then you have to actually start to think about, well, what does that mean to do it well? What is this, in fact? I mean, have you noticed that a lot of the time you're probably on autopilot and you don't even question what this is? You're just kind of going through the motions. You just do the things. but it's probably worth considering. What is this? So that maybe you could do it well. So I'll propose to you some ideas that you might find interesting or useful for how maybe you could begin to do this well. And a lot of this might not be new for you if you've heard me speak before. Sorry to disappoint you. The first thing would be to consider, what do you want? And the funny thing is, a lot of the time, it seems like such a simple question, and yet turns out to be, for many of us, very difficult. So challenging that oftentimes people will try to avoid that by just about any means. But if you think about, again, here you are, you'd have to agree with that, right? You're here. Don't you want to know, like, what would be a good thing to be doing? Don't you want to know a good direction? And if you want to know a good direction, you have to know what you want, because what you want is what determines what's a good direction, as you've probably heard me talk about before. If you Would you say that west is a good direction? Would you say that east is a bad direction? They're not good or bad. It's all relative to where you want to go. So if your destination is west, then west would be a useful direction. And in that case, east would be not so useful. So where you want to go or what you want is really of fundamental importance. And if you don't have clarity about that, or if you're not willing to look at that, then you're going to be taking a lot of actions. You can't help but take actions. The government's going to make sure of that, because the government wants their money, right? So they're going to make sure that you're doing some kind of actions so that you can pay them their taxes. Somehow, and your body's going to insist at some point that you're going to take some kind of action. So you're going to be taking actions. But for what purpose? Is it for your purpose? Or is it for the government and for your body? So I'm suggesting that it's very useful to have clarity about what you want, because if you don't have clarity about what you want, then your actions are going to be in service of something else, basically making you a slave. So you could keep on doing that for years or decades. And at some point along the line, when the drugs don't work or when Facebook is shut down, there's a worldwide internet outage, and you're like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. I don't have any distractions anymore. Then you're face to face with the fact that you haven't figured out what you're doing. You haven't figured out where you're going. You haven't figured out why you're doing anything. You don't know. And that can be quite painful. So figuring that out sooner rather than later is useful. Now, The problem, as I said, is for a lot of people, they say that's too difficult. I can't figure it out. I don't know. So I thought it might be useful to take a look at this topic of knowing what you want in a little bit more depth. So uh, in terms of what you want, there are at least a couple different levels. And so one level would be goals. So goals would be things that you can attain that are measurable. So you could know whether you've achieved it or not because, and objectively. So, a goal would be to make $1 million. So you would be able to know whether you've achieved that or not. And others would also be able to measure that. So you could look at your bank account and verify that it says $1 million, and you could show that to somebody else, and they could also say, yeah, looks like you got $1 million in your bank account. So that would be an example of a goal. And a goal, so that's an example of a financial goal. You could have goals of other types, right? You could have a fitness goal. You could say, I want to lose 20 pounds. For those who do kilograms, I have no idea what that is. It's less than 10 kilograms, I think. Or you could say, I want to be able to run a marathon. You could say, I want to be able to deadlift 100 pounds or whatever. I don't deadlift, so I have no idea what a person would want to deadlift. You could have um, a relationship goal, like to get married. I laughed a little bit because as soon as I said that, I thought the opposite. You could have a goal to get divorced. People have that goal. You could have you could have a goal to improve your marriage. But if you wanted to improve your marriage, in order for that to be a useful goal, it would need to be measurable. So improvement, what would that mean? You'd need to have some kind of parameters that you could measure, like, record the number uh, of arguments that you have with your spouse in a week, and you'd want to reduce that by 50% or something. I mean, that's silly, but you'd want something measurable. Otherwise, you don't know whether you've achieved it or not. So people often make the mistake of trying to define a goal in terms of something that's not measurable. And how can you know? It would be like saying you're going to go on a journey. Great. Where are you going? Well, if you don't know, how do you know if you've arrived? You might say, well, I'll just know. How will you know? So defining your goals should be defined in a way. I say should. I think it's useful to define a goal in terms of something that can be measured. That way you can know whether you've achieved it or not. So goals are one level of, or one type of something that you could want. And a lot of the time, some people stay focused only on goals. And I think that for most people, probably for all people, ultimately, focusing only on goals is dissatisfying. So Does that mean that goals are bad or wrong or have no value? No, I think that they do have value, and I'll explain that in a moment. So another layer or level of things that you could want would be what I would call values. So values could be anything, but let's, think about the kinds of values that a person might want more of in their life. Might be things like happiness, joy, peace, freedom, love, acceptance. So a lot of the time, people will define what they want in terms of their values, which is great. But the thing about values is that they're not goals. The way that I'm using terms. So a goal, the way I'm using the term, is something measurable and specific that you can achieve. So if you define what you want in terms of values, then it's great, but it's not a goal. And so it makes the attainment sometimes, not always, but sometimes more challenging. And it can sometimes, not always, but sometimes it can take a person's, it can lead to a certain kind of detachment that in some cases can be experienced as problematic. If one is striving only to attain values independent of goals. So I'm not trying to dissuade you from focusing on values as something that you want. I actually think that it's very important. And I'm not saying that one should always also have goals. But I'm just pointing out that there can sometimes, for some people, be some challenges when focusing only on values. Because again, values they're not easy to measure. I mean, they're entirely subjective. So I can't know, like, I can't know if you're happy or not. And you could say you're like 50% happier today versus a month ago, but that's hard to measure, isn't it? So it's probably more important when you say to achieve your values than it is to achieve the goals. Because if you think about it, if you have a goal of making $1 million and you achieve making $1 million and that's it, you just have the $1 million, but you're not happier, more joyful, more peaceful, more connected, none of those things. Who cares? I mean, you might say, well, at least I've paid off my debt. Okay, but what is that doing for you? Just having $1 million by itself would just be actually unfulfilling. So, uh, so the values are more important for us, I would say. But, and here's kind of where I'm going with all this. For many of us, it's quite useful to pair our goals and values because the goals give us direction, allow us to measure our progress, give us actions that we can take. And if we pair that with values, then we can also achieve success in regard to those values at the same time as we're undertaking that journey to achieve our goals. So if you are somebody who is only focused on goals, then I encourage you to find out what are the values that you really want to fulfill through the achievement of that goal. Because when you know what the values are that you want to achieve through the attainment of that goal, this will help you to take steps to achieve that goal in alignment with those values. I've often suggested that if you have a goal, there are many ways that you might achieve it. And some of those you would find to be fulfilling and some of them not. For example, if you wanted to make $1 million, you could make $1 million in a lot of different ways. You know, like you could go, you could go, you could rob people and make $1 million. You could violently assault people and steal their money. That would be one way to do it. Would you feel fulfilled having made $1 million going about it that way? Probably not. And if you would, then that's quite interesting. So, and this is true of all kinds of goals, you know, whether your goals are financial or health or relationship related. So think about what are the values that you want to fulfill through the achievement of your goal. And then when you are taking actions to achieve your goal, make choices, select those actions in alignment with your values that you want to achieve through that goal. And the amazing thing is, when you do that, you'll be quite happy. So then on the other side is if you're one of those people who defines your what you want just in terms of values, if that's working really well for you, by all means, continue to do that. But if you are someone who does that and you find that's challenging for you, you're struggling, then I'll encourage you to think about adding some goals. So you could think about it in terms of if you already know what values you want to fulfill in your life, and you're struggling to have a sense of making progress, then think about when you have achieved those, when you fulfilled those values, what will that look like? What will you be doing? Who will you be doing it with? Where will you be? Because that might reveal to you some goals that you actually have that you didn't realize that you had. So I've talked about this before in terms of the hero's journey, because I've talked about how the hero's journey has these two levels to it. So there's the outer level and the inner level. And the outer level would be the level of what this would map to the level of goal. So the hero wants to go to a certain destination to attain some special thing in order to have a certain outcome. And then there's the inner journey, which is the inner transformation, because in order to achieve that outer goal, the hero has to undergo an inner transformation in order to become that person that he or she needs to become in order to be able to fulfill that, satisfy that goal. So that's like the values. See, if a person wants to make $1 million, they think they want to make $1 million, but in order to make $1 million, they actually have to make an inner transformation in order for that to be really fulfilling. And that inner transformation means discovering and living in alignment with those values. So now, with goals, sometimes people have some issues with goals. Some people are great with goals. They love goals. They're just, gung-ho on goals. They just want to keep ticking off the boxes and just like, I did this goal, I did the next goal, I did, isn't that wonderful? Some of us, we're not, we just can't get all that excited about it. And so we can have resistance to having goals. And again, if it works for you not to have goals and just to focus on values, that's fine. You could certainly do that. But I think that that's challenging because here we are, we're living in this world, we're doing things. So like I pointed out before, we're doing things. It's very difficult to avoid that. So you're going to be taking actions. And if you're not conscious about the actions that you're taking, then, as I've already pointed out, then it's likely that those actions are going to be dictated by something else. So you can, does not make it impossible for you to fulfill your values, but it might make it more challenging. The alternative that I'm proposing is that you could actually tell the truth to yourself, which is that there are things that you want. There are goals that you want to achieve. And you might not have been thinking about them as such, but it might be helpful to you if you did think about them that way. And the reason is because when you want to achieve something, when you want to achieve a goal, then you have to take consistent action in alignment with the achievement of that goal. And when you know what your values are that you want to fulfill through the achievement of that or the attainment of that goal, this will provide you with the perfect opportunity to succeed in that. So it allows you to live purposefully and intentionally. Whereas if you avoid goals, it can make it more difficult. Not impossible. So I'm really not trying to talk anybody out of anything that's already working for them. So please, anything that's already working for you, keep on doing that. I'm just proposing to you some things that you might find helpful if you are experiencing any challenges that you're not sure how to deal with in your life. So sometimes, as I say, people will they'll have goals that they haven't made conscious, and they'll deny that they have any goals. And sometimes they do this because they think of goals as being something, say, grandiose, whereas their goals might not be as grandiose, at least not in their way of thinking. So, an example might be, let's say that you have a relationship in your life of some kind, could be with a child or a spouse or a parent or a sibling or a friend or a colleague or a employer or an employee, some of these kinds of relationships that you find quite challenging, and you would like to experience some improvement in that relationship. So you actually you have a goal, you would like to have improvement. But if you don't make it conscious, then you don't get the benefits of having a conscious goal. So in order to make it conscious, you would need to, first of all, admit that you would like to have improvement in that relationship. And then in order for this to be measurable, you would need to define what that improvement is and how you can measure it. So that would be an example of a goal that a person might have, but might not realize that they have. And if you make that conscious, then you can take advantage of the benefits of having goals, which is that you can orient yourself consistently, take steps in that direction. So I really encourage you to consider that, because, like I said from the beginning, here you are in life. Doesn't it make sense to do it well? So you have things that you want, and you could just deny that. You could ignore it, or you could take this let's just see what happens approach. But think about it. If you imagine that you're waiting for a bus and you get on the bus arrives and you get on the bus and you ask the bus driver, where is this bus going? And the bus driver says, I don't know. We'll just see what happens. How do you feel about that? If that's if that's what you're wanting, then great. There's nothing wrong with that. But is that what you want? So, with you in your relationships, you could just take that approach. It's like, oh, we'll just see. But what's the likelihood of you getting the outcome that you want if you take that approach? So, getting clear on what outcome you actually want is a useful step in that process, because then you can know what you want, and then you can begin to take consistent steps in that direction. Now, here's another consideration. So you might find it useful to identify those things which actually matter to you. Because remember that what I proposed is that there are at least two layers of this process. So one would be the goal, and the other is the values. Now, the values are what actually I'm proposing, what really matter to you. When you fulfill your values, that's what you really want. But in order to achieve that, for most of us, it needs to be aligned with our actions in this world. And that's where it's useful to align that with your goals so that your goals and your values are working together. And this is also I've suggested there's a parallel here to the hero's journey, so that the outer aspect of the hero's journey is like the goal, and the inner aspect of the hero's journey, the inner transformation, is the parallels to the values. So if you think about how the hero's journey works, there's um, a point of no return. And the reason there's a point of no return is because it's the journey often involves a lot of inconvenience. I mean, think about all the stories that you know that follow this arc of the hero's journey. So would you agree that they involve a lot of inconvenience? Like, the hero is going to undergo some tests. The hero is not going to be comfortable all along the way. And if you think about it, there's a reason why that is the case, because in this process of creation, once something has been created, then it becomes solidified, it's stabilized, it's normalized. And so the everything then is working to maintain that stability. So it doesn't matter at that point whether what you have, what the experience is, what that creation is, whether that is what you would consider to be good or bad. It's irrelevant. Everything is going to work to keep it the same. I mean, have you noticed this in your own life, where there are things where you're like, yeah, I don't really like this so much. But then it just, unless you're willing to do something to change that, it's just going to keep on happening. It's going to keep on staying the same, because everything conspires to maintain the status quo. So in order to make the change, the desired change, there's going to be necessarily a going against the status quo, which will be experienced most likely as uncomfortable. So there's a critical point in that hero's journey of the point of no return, because if the hero could return back to the convenience and comforts of the village life, he or she would. Because and I've talked about this before, about this relates to willpower. So we can use our willpower uh, only up to a point. Most of us, I mean, for everybody, but for most of us, that point is it's fairly Our ability to use our willpower is fairly short-lived. We can't use it for too long or we burn out. So you can use your willpower as a catalyst to get yourself up off the couch because you want a change, because you believe something's the right thing or whatever it is. And you can use that to take some action, but it's only going to take you so far. And so if you're running only on willpower, you're not going to be able to succeed. So the point of no return is what overcomes that, because you can use your willpower to get to the point of no return if necessary, right? Because you say, well, I should do this thing. It's to save the village. I should do it. Or I want it. It's so exciting. I want to do it. You can use your willpower up to a point, but then the point of no return ensures that, okay, now you don't have to use willpower anymore. Now it's just like, you gotta. So if you're choosing goals that you don't really care about, then you're going to start to experience some discomfort and you're going to go back home. You know, I mean, how many times does that happen? Right? You say, I really mean it this time. I'm getting in shape. I really mean it. And then, it's hot. You start to sweat. You say, oh, I'm feeling tired. I don't want to keep walking. I don't want to run. I don't want to do yoga. I want to go into the air conditioning and sit and watch TV. So, being really clear with yourself that the goals that you selected actually matter to you, and that you know what values you're wanting to fulfill through the attainment of that goal, and that those are really important to you, is very useful in the process, because it will help you in essence to go beyond that point of no return. And you can know that because you just know that when you look back and consider the possibility of returning to the old way, you'll just know that's not an option for you. So you're not trying to force yourself to continue. It's just that it's the only real option available, because going back is no longer an option for you. Because going back it would be completely false. Just absolutely false. There would be no, it's like, you've probably have, if you've seen the Matrix, the movie, there's the scene where the red pill and the blue pill, and the guy who chooses, I think it's the blue pill, I think, is the one that puts the guy back in the Matrix. You know that guy? And if you don't know, then I've already ruined it for you. But that guy who chooses to go back, don't you think that, like, you're just like, no, that's not possible. You couldn't go back, could you? That you have to, in order for this to work, you have to have goals that are like that for you, where I can't go back. To go back would be false. There's no way that could offer any real satisfaction. It would be a total lie. So it's well worth getting clear on these things for yourself, because if you don't get clear on these things, you're making things really hard on yourself. I know that oftentimes it seems the other way around. It seems like, well, it'd be so much easier just to keep scrolling on the phone. It seems really hard to take a few minutes a day just to contemplate what you want and to maybe go through an exercise and write down the values that you want to fulfill through the attainment of your goal. But um, it's really so much harder to avoid it because in the long run, you will just waste so much energy and ultimately be unfulfilled. And you've been through that cycle so many times already. So if you just tell the truth, you know that. So don't do that to yourself anymore. Now, when I say that it's important or useful to choose those goals which are important enough to you, then here's another place where people get hung up because they say, "Oh, well, I don't know if my goals are that important." Well, so part of the what's great about knowing what your values are that you want to fulfill through the goal is that that can help you in this process so that the values can actually transform, a, let's say, a lackluster goal into something that you can actually use as a viable vehicle. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should just use any goal, one that you don't care at all about. But if you think about something, some goal, and it's if you just consider this for a moment, it's not that hard. Think about the things that pain you in your life, and then think about what you want instead. So that will tell you some goals that are actually things that you are interested in. But it's possible that even so, sometimes you might struggle with a goal by itself to get past that point of no return. Because you might say, well, yeah, I kind of would like the improvement in the relationship, but it's not that bad. It's tolerable. Yeah, it sucks, but I could just scroll on my phone and and I'll be okay. I'll get through. But if you acknowledge that it's painful and then you take a moment just to get clear about what you do want instead, then this can be a goal that you can use and then find out what values you want to fulfill through the attainment of that goal and realize that those values matter a great deal. You will not be happy in this life or any other life if you're not in alignment with those values. And no, there's no amount of Facebook, there's no amount of drugs, there's no amount of CrossFit, there's no amount of Wim Hof that's going to fix that for you. As great as all those things might be. So when you put these things together, when you figure out what goals actually matter to you, and you don't need an exhaustive list of all of them. I mean, one's good enough. If you have at least one goal that matters to you, at least enough that you can sort of have some enthusiasm for it, and then find out what are the values that you want to fulfill through the attainment of that goal, and be really, really clear with yourself that those values matter a great deal. When you have that, then Just establish a daily habit of reminding yourself of that. Even if it's just once a day, just for 30 seconds. And you might think, well, what's that going to do for me? Well, you might be surprised. It could do a great deal because if you do that every day, then every day, at least once, you'll be remembering what's actually important to you. And that's going to start to provide some contrast. So pretty soon you'll find that you've gone beyond that point of no return because you'll realize that the old way is no longer an option for you. Because you'll realize that the old way is not going to give you what you really want. So, I know a lot of the time people, they think they want something more than that. But try that out sincerely. I'm confident that you will be quite pleased with the results. I'm confident that if you do just that much, that will produce remarkable positive changes in your life. Will that happen overnight? Probably not. And if it happened overnight, it's not that it couldn't be worthwhile and satisfying, but it probably wouldn't be. So that's why being clear about what you want is so powerful because it keeps you oriented in the right direction. Because otherwise, like I've said, day after day, you'll be taking action, you'll be doing stuff, you'll be going here and there, bills to pay, mouths to feed. And you can keep telling yourself, well, I gotta. It's just what this life is about. But actually, is that what this life is about? Who said? Maybe you get to say what this life is about for you. Don't try to tell anybody else because they don't want to hear it. But and it's not for them, it's for you. You get to choose, or at least let's say discover what this life is about for you. If you don't, then you'll probably find that you'll end up in the last moment of this life with regret because you didn't actually bother to get clear and to discover what this life is really about for you. But when you do what I'm proposing, you don't have to keep making that same mistake. You wouldn't have to keep feeling like you're stuck. You'd actually start to know who you are, which is what I view the real value of this is. Because just undertaking journeys in and of themselves, you know, that's not that interesting. But it's about the revelation of who you are. And this is the last thing I think, it's the last thing I'll say about this is that revelation of who you are is something that people are looking for. People want to know who they are. But a lot of the time, people think that they're going to discover who they are by avoiding this world. And that could work. I can't say that it couldn't. I mean, I think anything is possible. But you could just tell the truth. How well does that seem to be working for you? Right? Is taking no action working well for you? Is avoidance working well for you? Is keeping your fingers crossed that the next Vipassana retreat will do it working well for you? And if not, then you might find that what I'm suggesting could produce better results. It does require that you take some action consistently. It's not a lot that I'm proposing. I'm just saying take a little bit of time each day and then see if maybe that doesn't start things moving in a useful direction that gives you greater revelation about who you are and ultimately deep fulfillment that you've been looking for but not sure where to find. So that's all I've got for today. For those who are here live, I'm happy to stay on for group coaching. For those who are watching this recording on YouTube, then if you would like to join the meetings live, you're welcome to do so. You can get information about that by signing up for the newsletter on my website at joeylott.com. And if you've stayed here this long, then I have an idea that the Manifesting Truth program may be something that you would be interested in and find valuable. And that is a paid program that I offer. It's a 9-week program with 9 simple lessons that are the fundamental lessons and tools that you can use to transform your life, to discover who you are, and to live in alignment with that for true fulfillment. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, then you could find more information about that at my website at joeylott.com/manifesting-truth. And I'll provide the link to those in the description on YouTube. So again, for those who are here live, we'll stay on for group coaching. And for those who are watching on YouTube, blessings to you. Bye for now.